This is The Recap, a weekly reflection on the sermons of Fellowship Baptist Church in Maineville, Ohio, seeking to help you make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. I'm your host this week, Ryan Land, and I'm here with the preacher of this week's sermon, Nathan Mabry. Nathan, welcome back to The Recap.
Thank you. Good to be here.
2 weeks in a row.
Record.
Have you ever been on The Recap 2 weeks in a row?
No.
I don't think so. And this is also plays a historical marker. The first episode of The Recap without Brent. So he is not joining us this week. Nathan preached, did an excellent job preaching from Hebrews. Now, I always do a little icebreaker question, and Nathan asked me if there was a heads up, and he does not get a heads up. So the title of your sermon was Hello from the Other Side, and I want to know, what's your favorite Adele track?
That's easy for me.
Okay.
Make You Feel My Love, which is actually
it's a cover.
It's not original with her.
Yeah.
Original for me, actually, with Garth Brooks.
Oh, okay.
And I love his take on it, but turns out it's actually a Bob Dylan song.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's my.
But not Hello from the Other Side. That's her, right?
That is her.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite. This is maybe like not a hot take. This is like the easiest pick, but Skyfall.
Oh.
The James Bond song that she won an Oscar for. Yeah, it's so good. I just thought it was such a funny. It's like Nathan doesn't strike me as like a huge Adele fan, but here he is, titling his sermon after an Adele track. So I was just interested in that.
Well, other interesting fact. I sent Brent a text back in March before the series even started, and said, "Hey, I was reading through Hebrews and reminded about the story of Moses there, and I'd love to do one of the. I got kind of like this message percolating, and I'd like to call it Hello from the Other Side. I mean, and so this has been on the books and on the calendar.
Nathan's been working on this sermon since March. So that's what we're hearing.
Let's like to believe that, but
actively working on the sermon. So let's dive right in. I thought you had a lot. You covered, I think, there's a lot of topics, that just that even being in Hebrews, on this side of the cross, like you talked about at the beginning, that we can kind of dive into. But let's go through your points. We got a couple questions that we can talk. But before we can talk about anything, the burning question in the room, you got to talk about how beautiful Moses was. Set up. Where does it talk about this? Set this up, and then tell us about how good looking Moses was.
Yeah, well, it's certainly in our text, and it just says. So here's Hebrews 11, verse 23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw the child was beautiful.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, like
good thing he wasn't an Uggo. Like this wouldn't have happened.
What parent looks at their child and says, "Oh, that is such an ugly baby"? I mean, we can't even look at other people's children and say that.
We may think it,
but we don't say it out loud.
We don't say it out loud. We certainly don't write it in God's holy word.
But actually, if you go all the way back to Exodus chapter 2, verse 2, it uses the term "fine child." That's our ESV, but there are like other translations that really talk about it being beautiful. And even talking to Jacob happened to teach my kids a Bible study class yesterday morning.
From an excellent job
from Stephen in Acts, and even Stephen in Acts, as he's recounting the history of Israel, and he gets to Moses, he talks about him being beautiful to God, and so it's very interesting that here we have 3 different places that Moses gets referenced through Scripture, and all of them,
they're like, man, he's falling.
Yeah, they hint at his beauty,
beautiful,
and we don't have a lot more outside of that, but Josephus, who is a Jewish historian, and he, not inspired, but drawn a lot from word of mouth tradition, makes note also of Moses' beauty. And in fact, not really as a child, but more as an infant, as a toddler, as a grown man. In fact, how when Pharaoh's daughter presumably presented Moses, to the Pharaoh, like, look at what a beautiful child this is, and talks about his size and the beauty. So he was like a healthy young man, and then using the term divine form or appearance, and then Josephus even notes that, like, as he grew as a man, that people were amazed and astonished at his abnormal beauty to the point that they would stop and stare at him. So there's some historical evidence that kind of refers back to this. But so then I talked about Moses growing up as the elite, having access to the money, to the education that they're in Egypt. And so then I get, he's got beauty, he's got bucks, he's got brains, he's got brawn. Right.
That'll preach, man.
That's a tough guy. But
preach.
I mean, we also know, Moses fled Egypt in part because he murdered
People wouldn't stop looking
He
at
murdered an Egyptian, right?
No, and when everyone's looking at you because you're so good looking, it's hard to hide from the authorities.
Oh, I know that guy. I've seen that guy.
It's like I thought he just looked like Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
Have you seen the Ten Commandments? Have you seen that movie?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Brent and I have never. I've wanted to talk about it on the podcast, and I've never brought it up. But I don't know that Brent has ever seen it. So, but you're a little bit older than Brent, and so the movie's a little bit older. And so I thought maybe you probably saw it in theaters.
Thanks. Not the case. I did. In studying, I did listen to a couple of sermons on Hebrews. And,
oh yeah.
Particularly this passage, and one guy talked about having the opportunity to have met Charlton Heston.
Oh, no way.
He said he was a little bit actually disappointed.
Oh,
I don't know. It didn't give any more context.
He was just, I don't know.
It wasn't all that he thought he was going to be.
Yeah, he was more Ben-Hur, less Moses, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe more astronaut from Planet of the Apes.
Oh,
those are the only 3 Charlton Heston roles I know. So,
well, that's more than I would have named.
All right, well let's talk about your points. Gosh, we could do a whole section or a whole podcast series on what we're about to talk about. Yeah. Let's just talk about it. So your first point: faith frees us from the fear of man, and really, it's the next part. We're talking about the fear of God that we could do a whole podcast series on. But let's start here, talking about the fear of man. Unpack that really quickly. Just kind of give us the summary of what it means that faith frees us from the fear of man in this context of Hebrews 11.
Yeah, I gave a reference for people if you want to know more about both these concepts: fear of man, fear of God. Ed Welch is a pastor, a counselor, has written a book very helpful for me. When people are big and God is small.
Yeah,
and sometimes that's the perspective that, like, when man's opinion. What man has to say, our persona in front of mankind, when that matters more to us than God's opinion of us, then in essence, we revere what man has to say more than what God has to say.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the fear of man, there is both, we can probably talk about it in 2 ways, both being that reverence, like that we actually care and concern what they have to say. And then there is legitimate what man can do against you. This is less in America. We think for Christians in hostile places.
Yeah.
That there's a rightness in some sense that they fear for their lives. And we're no intent to shame any of them, but Jesus says, don't fear the one who can destroy your body.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
Fear the one that can destroy your body and your soul. And so this also can apply to us in the sense of social fear. Like that we are afraid to speak of our faith in a sense because of how others might react to us.
Yeah.
As a result of that.
Obviously that's a battle everyone fights their whole life, but particularly when you're a teenager and you're kind of finding out your identity, who you are, and so much of that is socially driven. And I would say especially in like the social media age, it's like less of a fear of man and it's like a fear of lack of likes, fear of lack of followers, and so we are so shaped, I think, by the Ed Welch idea, like when people are big and God is small, is like in our decision making day by day by day. How do we guide our decision making, both in public and in private, more by what God has to say versus what the social pressure is. And so you think of like the obvious examples, like sharing your faith, right? That's like going to cost you some comfort. But then even like the things you post, the things you champion, the things you don't allow. So culture is what do you allow, what do you not allow, what do you celebrate.
Yeah.
And so it's like those things in your home, in your workplace, on your team, right? Are those things guided by a fear of God or by a fear of man? And so like that's a struggle, like we all
100%.
Yeah. But I mean, in youth ministry, this is a thing we're constantly talking about is like, are you more concerned with what some rando in your math class is thinking about you?
Yeah.
Or like the God of the universe is thinking about you?
Yeah. Where do you find your identity? Where do you find your value, your worth? Not everybody knows that, I started my professional career in a sense, in full-time ministry. So we're bivocational now, but spent 6 years in full-time ministry. And one of the things for me, and this is not for everybody, to make this choice was like, I felt like I was a professional Christian. Like when your livelihood and everything is tied to that, and really had no gospel outreach.
Yeah.
So we didn't have kids at the time, or for much of that time. So it's like, it's not where my kids are in activity. We lived in small neighborhoods. So you just limited from a relational perspective. Like I could go down and knock on doors and share the gospel. But from a relational perspective, all of our social life was church related.
Yeah.
And so due to other circumstances as well, we've chosen to be bivocational, which I think has helped me in a lot of ways connect with people in our church.
Yeah.
That, because they're not professional Christians.
Yeah.
And so now I also can share this reality that you got to be careful about your livelihood. Like there are some corporations today where if you very bold out in your faith, you could actually put your job at risk.
Oh,
probably not from a
sure.
legal perspective.
Yeah.
But they'll find a way around that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. They'll wait for the first, slip up and you think about not even from a losing your job, but like, am I gunning for a promotion?
Yeah.
Is there a promotion coming up that I'd like? And would being bold or honest about my faith in some way hinder that opportunity? And it's interesting in the text, it talks about the parents, not living in fear of the king's edict, like the Pharaoh's edict. And so there is this very real sense. It's like, I saw a video this week of a church. I wish I remember where it was, in Africa, but their church had been burned down by Muslims, like the whole church building. And so there's this video of them sitting in this burned out husk of a building, just like singing.
Wow.
Just like singing hymns. And so it's like the in Hebrews, this is, and in the Exodus story, they're talking about life or death.
Right.
We're gonna refuse the king's edict to the point where it's like we're gonna lose out on a lot more than a job. And so it's like I think what we take from that is like, man, praise God, we're not in a much harder situation than it's like when it's just social capital or relational capital or like job regular capital. And so, and finding the right, and don't hear me say like, you got to go, be yelling about LGBTQ trans issues all the time and put your faith on or put your job on the line, or you're not being faithful. That's not what I'm saying. Right. But it's just like the Hebrew midwives were not like just throwing the king's edicts off left and right. No, it was just like a particular time and a particular place when they needed to be faithful, and they were. And in the same way, it's like there are going to be particular times or particular places we have to be faithful. And it's like, are we going to be ready? Are we going to fear God more than we fear man? I think when we have conversations like this, there can be this sense that's like, if you're not all out, like talking about your faith all the time in every Zoom meeting and everything, it's like, then you're not doing it right, which is not what I want to say. There's certainly a way to be faithful at work, and not be like, just like be that mad Christian guy all the time, And so just want to be clear about that. I think that's a hard balance to strike.
Absolutely. And I face this every day.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I get that. I also would like to say there's my perspective and opinion is that living in America, we might say we're blessed to live in America. I'm not sure that's true because I think it's so much easier to be lukewarm in America than it is anywhere else in the world in a lot of sense. And so you talk about those whose church has been burned down and here they go to the ashes and sing. Like that's a real, like we're not concerned about our church being burned down, our church building being burned down.
Yeah.
But when your faith is truly on the line, it's like there's both for the world around you, but for yourself to know where does your hope and confidence lie. And we think prosperity is a blessing.
Yeah.
And I would say it's not. I would say prosperity, certainly from a monetary perspective, is a curse. In the sense that I think it was Jesus who said to the disciples in particular that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven.
Yeah.
So maybe we should all be praying, Lord,
Make us
do anything
poorer.
for me except make me rich.
Yeah.
Like that's not what I want. That would be, and so, and I think any of us in America, when you look at the global wealth,
Oh yeah.
we're all
in the
in
top 1%.
Yes.
Yep. And that goes back, I think that chasing that, just even that notion of like, the American dream, like go be successful, go make your money, go, be secure. That is rooted, I think, in a fear of man. Like we talk about here, that's a culturally perpetuated idea that what a successful life is one where you're secure, you're self-reliant, you're paying your own bills, you're whatever, like that's not
401k.
That's not the Bible, right? We were talking this week at camp with a guy that, it's like it's so hard sometimes to build a church culture of generosity in really specific ways because people are so scared of being honest about what they need. It's like if I weren't able to pay my water bill,
Right.
that would be embarrassing to me. And I would not want to tell anyone at the church like, hey, could you help me out with my water bill? But that's not biblical. Like you look at the book of Acts, they shared in all things.
Yeah.
And so it's like the first thing I should be able to do is come to the church and say, hey, I need help with this and y'all are my family. And so it's like, I know y'all will be good to help me out. Right. And can you and be honest with that and because the embarrassment is driven by the fear of what they're going to say about me, by the fear of man. And so all that stuff, it's like makes me think of VBS. When we're talking about do not be transformed or do not be conformed to this age, right? To all the stuff going on around us, to the fear of man, to the hustle and bustle, all that stuff, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so it's like that's so true when you think about this fear of man versus fear of God concept. Is like the fear of man is do not be conformed to this age, right? Don't do all the things that everyone is expecting you to do just because that's what we do, as Americans or as as my family, as lands, right? We all have like a different culture. It's like that's not what we live. That's not our standard, right? Like our standard is a fear of God, right? Is what God has revealed in His Word. But we add so many things onto that. I feel like, and so we equate things that are a fear of man issue, but in our minds we've made them like a fear of God issue.
Yep.
And so it's like when we talk about being rich in America, it's like that's one of those things. Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? We think that's a godly issue, when in some ways it can be, but not.
Don't be lazy.
Not universally. The worker is due his wages. Not everyone is due their wages. The worker, and so just to be careful about those things that are shaping you.
Yeah, I would also just made me think. I was texting with family this weekend in our church that was going through a little bit of challenging time, and but not necessarily wanting everybody to know
Right.
all the depths of the things that are going on. And I said,
Which is fair.
And
Yeah.
I said, but at the same time, I said, if you need something, please share.
Yeah.
Like, I understand the pride, the sense like, you know, you don't want to admit that you don't have it all together, or that you're missing something, there's something wrong in your life or whatever. It's like, if you need something, I said, because you could be robbing someone else
Of their blessing.
of the gift of,
Yeah.
of being able to be a blessing to you.
Yep. No, that's
And so-
100% true.
And so, for all those listening in our church community, don't rob
Yeah.
others of the opportunity to be a blessing.
Well, one thing you just said, you know, it's like the issue that keeps us from saying that stuff is like, well, we want to keep up this facade. It's like we've got it all together. But it's like, by the very notion of being Christians who believe the gospel, we've all confessed to one another, we don't got it all together.
Yeah.
And so it's like, not surprising if you've messed up, not surprising if you've mismanaged your money, or not surprising if you're coming up short. Like,
Yeah.
that's not a shock to us, because we all know, like, we're all messed up, the world's messed up. Like, that's not a shock to us. And so it's like, that's how the gospel informs, you know, like how we treat one another. I'm getting a little bit into my I'm going to be preaching a sermon in a couple weeks. But,
Yeah. And I said, it's funny because I said, if you need babysitting, I got babysitters at my house, like that. I
Not
experienced.
you.
Not me. But I'm like,
your kids.
I know, exactly. And then I said, and of course my back was hurting me yesterday. And I said, if you need something heavy lifted and moved,
I've got heavy lifters.
I'll give you Jacob's number.
I thought you were going to say your sons. No, Jacob.
Jacob was actually there with me
Jacob
when this
Bulkerson.
conversation started.
That's what I call him, Jacob Bulkerson.
Jacob
Because
Bulkerson.
he's so ripped.
Bulky.
Okay. So now from fear of man, we turn that faith fuels. I really like that word. You had a lot of F's. I like that. It's like it frees us. It fuels us.
Is that the grade I got? An
Yeah.
F?
No. But so faith fuels our fear of God. So summarize that. Summarize that for me for a bit.
I will say on the F's, I mean, faith and fear were both in the text.
Yeah, that's easy.
So it's just like this freedom and this fueling were just what I kind of threw in there. But yes, so faith fuels our fear of God because, again, when people are big and God is small, let's make God big. Like, we serve a big God and sufficient to all things. And so really about how our faith just continues in our hearts and minds to make God bigger and make God more sufficient, make us, and this, what I really wanted to bring out, and so it's a difficult concept for us to understand the fear of God. There's so many, the D group that I'm a part of, this comes up on occasion about really trying to equate the discipline of God versus punishment and fear. And in particular, I would say, if you are in Christ, God would be unrighteous to punish you for your sins. Because your sin has been paid for.
Yeah.
It's like, he's
You're
not
paying for it twice.
we don't pay for it twice.
It's unjust.
Right.
Yep.
So that's not God's way. God, yes, we sin. Yes, we should have guilt. And yes, we should repent and restore. And God is there for all of that. But God is not there to punish us because of our sin. Discipline, which you look in Hebrews chapter 12, the chapter that follows this, right? If you are a child of God, God will discipline you. And in fact, if you're not being disciplined, and so I try to drive this difference between what is punishment versus discipline, and one of them has a purpose. One of them is just do the crime, do the time.
Yeah. It's punitive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the other, which punitive and punish seem to come from the same root word.
Probably do.
But
Funny
discipline and disciple, right? Like, again,
exactly.
So like, it's all about and building up and growing. And so when we talk about the fear of God, we're not talking about standing in fear, trembling in our boots because we think he's going to crush us or hurt us because of something that we've done, but really growing our vision of a bigger God, of a God that is great. We use the word great about God.
Or awesome.
Awesome. But instilling awe, absolutely. The problem is with our language today, we'd talk about a cheeseburger that was awesome.
Yeah, you know exactly right.
I mean,
great.
Tony the Tiger says
They're
great.
Or even like the word divine. You know, like we say stuff like, "Oh, it was divine."
Yeah.
You know, not often, not frequently, but you hear it in movies and stuff. It's like, was it divine? Like, was it godly? Like, that's what divine
Exactly,
means.
yeah. So when we think of a great God, it's pretty great.
Yeah.
But-
he's awesome, dude. God's
Yeah.
so awesome.
And I think we've lost that language. And truly, from a fear of God perspective, it's kind of regaining some of that awe and reverence for God. But at the same time, and Brent used this just the week before, as your father who the rest of the nation stands in fear of, but yet you can go to the king's bed because you're thirsty in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And so he still welcomes us in that way. But I'd use this kind of contrast of being afraid of God versus fear of God. And both was like, hey, what is your reaction, your response when you are confronted with the sin or the holiness of God and the sin in your life?
Yeah.
And if it is...
Oh, yeah. I wrote this down. This was so good.
If it's your response is that you have shame, you want to hide yourself, you back off of your relationship from God, you excuse yourself, you accuse others, it's somebody else. Look at that woman you gave me, or so-and-so made me do it. And it's...
Everyone was doing it.
Right. And so that's being afraid of God, of what God is going to do to you because of
Well, and I
what
mean,
you've done.
This woman, you get, like, you talk about Genesis, right? That's exactly what they do. They go hide.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they
yeah.
have shame
Yeah.
as a result. And so God then goes and gives this picture of killing an animal and putting the skins on them. But the Lord restores them. Whereas if you have a fear of the Lord versus being afraid of God, and again, confronted with God's holiness and your sinfulness, well, then you respond with confession. You respond with receiving that forgiveness, that cleansing, and then return in a heart of gratitude and service to God. And because you see the bigness of who He is and what He has already done for you, because He is holy, because He is worthy of praise, because He is awesome and worthy of our awe.
Yeah.
And so just trying to give that a contrast.
I thought that was an excellent way to because like that's a hard thing to diagnose in yourself, to be like, am I afraid of God, or do I have fear of the Lord? Am I in awe of God? And that thinking about, all right, when you sin, when you dwell on God's holiness and your sinfulness, how do you react? I thought that was an excellent way to test how you're thinking about God. So it's like, am I running away? Am I hiding? Am I guilty? Or it's like, or am I secure? Am I encouraged is the wrong word, but am I transfixed by His mercy, by His grace, and to know that I am undeserving. Like this Isaiah picture of like, whoa, I am a man of unclean lips, among a people of unclean lips, right? But yet He's taken the coal and cleaned us. And so I think that's like I thought that was an excellent way for even me sitting in my seat. I was like, yeah, I get that they're different, but it's like, how do I know that they're different? And just to think about like your reaction to your own sin, revealing that about God, I think is so helpful.
But I don't know where it is in the Bible, but He says it is His kindness that leads us to repentance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you're led to repentance because you sense the kindness of God and not the wrath of God, because the wrath of God does not abide on you, but the kindness of God does.
Yeah.
And do you have a big enough picture of God that when you sin and when you come to repentance and restoration, that you see it through the lens of God's kindness and mercy and compassion, and not because He's mad at you?
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of, which you'll appreciate this, in Les Mis, you have Jean Valjean, like the main character, who's like he's a debtor, he's a prisoner, he's broken the law, and there's this other character, Javert, who's like trying to like capture him the whole time, and it's like punitive. It's like he's just like, this is right, you're wrong, and he's just going after him, and he's always one step behind. He can never catch Jean Valjean. But there's one character that Jean Valjean never stops thinking about, and it's at the very beginning. This priest gives him a room to stay in, and Valjean robs him and
all the silver.
Yeah, and gets caught, and they bring him back to the convent where this priest is, and the guy says, "No, I gave it to him,
And you forgot this.
and you forgot these candlesticks."
yeah.
And that's what changes Valjean is the kindness and the grace and the mercy of the priest. And like he sells all that silver, but through the whole movie, the musical, the book, he keeps those silver candlesticks as a reminder of like, this is what changed me. And it was the kindness of the priest, not the angry justice of Javert, the police officer. And so it's like, it's such a great gospel picture.
That'll preach.
Oh yeah. And it has several times. I've used it many times in sermons and lessons. But it's like, yeah, what changes us is not God's anger, is not God's wrath. It's like, it's not God, it's not being scared of God, but it's the awe, the reverence, the amazement that God chose me. God showed mercy on me. God did this for me. Why? How could I do anything else but serve him? It's like you think about Peter, right? When all these people leave Jesus because he's talking about like eating his flesh and drinking his blood, and people are like, "This is so weird," and they're out, and Jesus is like, "Are y'all leaving?" And Peter's like, "Where else?
Go?
Where else do we go? Like you have the words of life." It's like we may not understand it, we may not get it, but we've seen you, and we can't go anywhere else. And so it's like that even is a picture, I think, of fear of the Lord. Like we got nowhere, like you're the only thing. Like we got nowhere else to go. Did you have another book that you referenced this?
Yeah, so The Joy of Fearing God.
Okay.
Also by Jerry Bridges. Who wrote Discipline of Grace.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Bridges got a lot of other really good books that I recommend every single one that I have read.
What's the other one of great? Pursuit of
Holiness,
Pursuit of Holiness.
Practice of Godliness.
Practice of Godliness. Okay.
There's Transforming Grace that's similar to the Discipline of Grace.
Mm-hmm. So the thing I always think when I think about fear of God or fear of the Lord is in the opening section of Eugene Peterson's Christ Plays in 10,000 Places. He gives the best explanation of, so he gives these kind of 4 characteristics of Christian living, and one of them is all hyphenated, fear of the Lord, because they're all one word except for this one, and so just hyphenated, fear of the Lord. And it's literally in like the introduction. Like this is a huge book, but it's like if you just read the first 50 pages, he talks about this, and it is like, I've never understood fearing God, fear of the Lord, and how that animates us to godly living more than when I read Christ Plays in 10,000 Places. So as soon as you said the words fear of God, that's immediately where my head went. So it's excellent.
Yeah, I couldn't. What I will say just about the Bridges book at the same time is like, let's just start with the title, The Joy of Fearing God.
Absolutely.
It's like, that does not sound right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find my my copy of it in my basement. So I didn't really pull any strong quotes out of it, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, we didn't even talk about that. I want to talk about this really quickly. That D.L. Moody quote about Moses's life in like so it's like 40 years being somebody.
40 years of somebody.
40 years realizing he's nobody.
Yep.
And then 40 years learning how God uses nobodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so good. Like that's like it's like if I could impart some wisdom into every student in youth ministry that they would hold on to, it would be like something like that. Like in a world of like influencers and like all I want is to be famous and for people to follow me and for people to know me. It's like just like you're nobody, and God uses nobodies, and that's good. Like that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I meant to write that down. I totally forgot, and it just hit me.
I mean, he has potential, no doubt.
Yeah,
I mean, he's a beautiful guy, got great education. He's got potential, and we could read a lot into it, but that perhaps he took too much of that went to his head. Perhaps I don't know.
We don't know.
Just speculate. So God's going to
the
bring
Prince
him.
of Egypt. It does.
Yeah. So God.
Movie.
Yeah. Well, and that should be our pattern right there.
Yeah.
But so God brings him down in a sense, and here he spends these 40 years as a shepherd, and there's a lot of obviously biblical shepherds and
Yep.
and things that get connected in that way, but what he learns through that before then God's like, I'm going to need you to shepherd. It's unsure exactly how many Israelites there were, probably in the millions, to shepherd this millions of people.
I took 54 teenagers to camp,
Yes.
and I thought that was an impossible shepherding task.
Wow.
So to,
Like through the wilderness. So he wouldn't have been able to have done that
yeah,
if he didn't have that experience.
he wouldn't have had the staff.
The staff. There's a little double entendre there.
Yeah, like his family, but also his actual
Actual physical staff.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Okay, well then, lastly, faith focuses our future with a promised land perspective, and then parenthetically, this is such a great turn of phrase: far-sighted faith.
Yeah.
Unpack that for us quickly.
Well, this is really the punchline I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would have to, and I didn't give this resource reference, but one of the other books in my life that's made a difference is a book called Future Grace. It's actually titled The Purifying Power of Living by Faith in Future Grace.
Just a Puritan wrote it?
John Piper.
Oh, okay. So
Close enough.
Pretty much a Puritan. He was like a teenager when they were all dying.
And
He's very old.
78 maybe.
Yeah. He's awesome. Right, Jacob? Jacob says yes.
And Piper's made a profound impact in my life from a pastor, theologian. But really the idea that all of faith is always forward looking, right? So even
Yeah.
as we are saved by faith, that does have a backward glance, right, to the cross, but it's faith in that God is going to, what he did on the cross and how that restores us, he's going to make good on that in
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah.
And just like Abraham is saved by faith, like Moses and all of those in the hall of faith, they're saved by faith, not because of what they are doing at the time, because they are looking forward to the cross and then beyond the cross, the other side. Hello, from the other side. And so we, myself included, get so mired down in tomorrow, and really meaning it's a Monday today, so a Tuesday tomorrow, like, or even what's going on tonight, or even what's happening right now. And not that we shouldn't be concerned about the near things, but how are we investing our life for eternity?
Oh, yeah. That rope story,
Yeah.
that was so good.
I really feel bad that I didn't just go buy a rope and do this
Like
and just rip
run
it
it
off.
out the side door.
Yeah.
Like into the parking lot.
Like it doesn't, like it just needs to go to a particular point.
Yeah,
Then you
yeah.
say, imagine
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it goes forever. And yet here we are, you just think maybe 2 or 3 inches at the front, and that's that's where we care about. That's where our
And we
attention is focused.
invest in, and
Yeah.
gosh, all that was so convicting to me.
And I'm not here to say this is what I have a grasp on.
Oh yeah, for
right?
sure.
This is I'm preaching to myself, and that's one of the reasons why this message meant so much to me, is just because I needed it so much, and still do, and will do, and continue to. But going back to this faith and future grace, he has a chapter in the book that I didn't bring this out in the story, but about what he calls the debtor's ethic. And so we often in life live by the debtor's ethic, so which means, hey, I'm going to invite you over to my house for dinner. And so now, what do you think? Oh,
Now I've got to have them over.
When are we going to have them over to
Yep.
pay them back for what they did for us?
Exactly right.
And that is not how we are intended to. That's not our relationship with God. Number one, we just can never pay him back.
It's like there's nothing we could give.
And similarly, when we do that, when you feel compelled to invite me over and pay me back, in a sense, for what I've done, now my gift was no longer a gift.
Yeah.
It was just an exchange, a trade.
Yeah. So when I first moved here, and still to this day, it's every year we go to the Wilson's house for Christmas. But my first couple of years here, I didn't have any family here, and I was here for the Christmas Eve service and stuff. So I went over there one year, and they had gotten me a present, and I had not thought to get.
Yeah.
I probably got the kids presents, but I had not thought to get like Brent or Kate a present. And this was like so formative to me. They gave me a present, and I was like, "Y'all, I'm so sorry I didn't get y'all anything." And Kate said, so matter of factly, she said, "That's okay. That's not how presents work." And I was like, "That's true." I was like, "Yeah." And I just like, and it was that same like debtor's ethic. Like I was like, "Oh, I should have gotten them something," but then for her to just be so matter of factly, like, "No, it's not how gifts work." And I'm like, "Oh, that's so true," and that has such gospel significance, right? That changes how you live, and it changes your motivations.
Yeah. And then Piper expands on this and talks about the argument of what they call it, from the lesser to the greater. And so if you come to me tomorrow and like, "Hey, you think I can borrow $5? Yeah, sure. Here's $5. Like, don't worry about it. Keep it." You come to me the next day and you ask for $5. Yeah, here you go. It's like, or if you came and said, "Hey, I need $1 million." Well, first off, I don't have $1 million. But let's just say,
I can't hook you up.
But let's just say I give you the $1 million. Then tomorrow, when you come and ask for $5, do you think I'm just going to be like,
"Nah, sorry,
I can't do that"?
Yeah.
And he goes to like Romans 8:29. He who did not spare his own. I think it's 8:29. Maybe not. It's in Romans 8.
You had me convinced.
Yeah, you just got to pretend you know what you're doing.
That's right.
He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how shall he not with him give us all things?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, God's already done the biggest, greatest thing possible. So can't we trust him with the little things?
Yeah.
And so this is where faith doesn't rest on a lot of speculation. Our faith rests on the reality that God has given his son for us. So all those other promises are yes and amen.
Yeah.
And we can have the confidence that he is going to fulfill and do all those things that he said. And I didn't. So like this farsighted kind of like came in, like when we need to look not at tomorrow, but look beyond.
Oh yeah.
Beyond our death, in a sense, like beyond into our eternity, and how can we impact our eternity today? And personally, I have become. I didn't have to wear glasses for most of my life. Here we are. If you're on the video podcast, I have glasses on this because I need them for near things.
Yeah.
I actually am farsighted. I can't, which means I can see far and I cannot see near. But how just for us in our lives to be farsighted, and then it just kind of dawned on me this little promised land perspective to just kind of throw in there, because that's all of Moses' life was a promised land perspective.
Yeah.
It was all about how do we get this nation, how do we get this people to the land that God has promised. And Moses didn't get to go there, but he went to the final promised land. And what is our promised land? And what is the eternal home that God has prepared?
Yeah.
And, if I go and prepare a place for you, will I not always also bring you? And we talked about that on last week's podcast.
And 2 weeks and 3 weeks ago.
So just bring all this together. I almost and wanted to encourage people just to go read Hebrews 12, because Hebrews 12 actually then talks a little bit more about that future and about that place that God has prepared for us. And actually in chapter 12, talks about Moses again, looking back at Moses as he's addressing the people after they came down, after he gave the 10 Commandments. And so it's like a real great tie-in on this fear to having this future focus on where and when God is going to make good on everything that he's promised for us.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's like an excellent way just to leave the sermon, to leave the church on Sunday, to be like, where are my eyes, right? Yeah. What am I focusing on? That's one thing we talked a lot about at camp, was just like, it felt like every night our conversations turned out to be like, stop paying attention horizontally, whether it be your sin, right? Like, or your works, like, oh, I'm a lot better than that person. It's like, because when you look at how holy God is, you're actually so far away. Or is it in our joy, right? We're comparing ourselves to other people. We're looking horizontally. And so it's like, I can't have joy because all these other people have the stuff I want. Mm-hmm. It's like, but when you look at the object of our faith, right? When you look at Jesus, when you look at what he's done, it's like, how can you not have joy? And so it's like, I felt like that this sermon like played into that. It's like, when you look to what God has for you and what God has already done for you, like, how can you have anything but faith? How can you have anything but joy? How can you have anything but obedience? And so I just thought that was so excellent and just so encouraging to leave, to be like, just like, all you gotta do is like fix your eyes on the promised land.
Exactly.
Invest your time, invest your life, invest your whatever in the promised land, in the promise of heaven, in the promise of new creation, because this is all vapor. This is all going away.
If I were to take you out to a football field and put you on one end zone and direct you to walk to the goalpost in the other end zone, but I'm going to put a blindfold on you, how straight of a line do you think you'd walk?
Not very straight. Yeah. I'd be hitting the stands.
But how straight of a line would you walk if you were looking at it?
Oh, yeah.
The entire time.
I would not veer.
Yeah. And so it's like, if we want to become like Jesus, then let's look at Jesus.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's in Thessalonians, he says, so we shall become like him, for we shall see him as he is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so there's this, some people think that just studying theology or studying the attributes of Jesus, I have a book on my shelf I have not read. It's called The Existence and Attributes of God by Stephen Charnock, another Puritan. It's well over 1,000 pages that they write about the existence and the attributes of God. And I would, although I haven't read it, I have read parts of it, but it's that
no one's ever read it. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Not a single soul on earth.
No, there are many souls that have. And I would think that if you read that book, if you just sit and dedicated your life to reading that book as it expounds scripture to you, that you would see the existence and the attributes of Jesus and you would become like him. Mm-hmm. Like, this is an informational book, but yet it could become transformational in your life. Because as you study the life of Christ, not just what he's told you to do, but who he is. Mm-hmm. As you get to that bigger view of God and the fear and reverence of God, as you begin to see God for more of who he is, then you become like him, for you see him as he is. Mm-hmm. And so where is our focus? Where do we put our eyes? Where do we set our minds, hearts, and affections? These are the things that will shape us.
Yeah. Well, that takes us into our first question, unless you have any final words on the sermon. All right. So this person writes in, this is right on topic. What are some routines or processes you follow to keep your heart and mind farsighted on Jesus and the finish line? And then they said, great job this week, Nathan. So,
well, hey, thank you to this person. Really appreciate it.
They felt free to tell you great job anonymously.
Yeah. Great. There's that great word again.
Yeah, great.
It was a great job.
I think you did an awesome job.
Oh, awesome.
Your job was an awesome job.
Right.
Routines, processes you follow to keep your heart and mind focused on Jesus.
It's a great question.
Excellent question.
I would love to say I have
a 5-step program.
Yeah. One of the things I think is important is your diet.
Go ahead.
And I don't mean by what you eat, but
what you intake.
Yeah, what you intake, what you consume. Mm-hmm. If we spend the majority of our time taking in social media, the news channel, whatever podcasts and books and music that we listen to, we are shaped by those things.
Yeah.
And if they are temporal in focus, I think it's important for us to be aware of what's going on in our culture and world around us. I don't mean to say that. If you get your news from social media, I think that's problematic for many reasons, particularly because social media and the algorithms that are connected to it are intended to drive and lean us in various directions.
Yeah.
But
mostly in the direction that we already think. Yeah.
Yes. And so I would say, what are you you can't subsist on a diet of once a week coming to church.
Yeah. Or even twice a week.
even twice a week. And you've got your D group in there.
Yeah.
But what? And you can't outsource your faith.
Nope, that's good.
You've got to take responsibility for your faith. And so I think guardrails are important. Interesting. I've shared this with a number of people. We're doing a little bit of a dumb phone June in the Mabry house.
Awesome.
We've not gone as extreme as we could, but limited to 1 hour of screen time for social media, streaming media, games, things that are distracting. You can still use your maps to get from point A to point B.
Messaging.
You got messaging, anything that's of a communication. I've told people before I have 3 C's when it comes to your mobile devices and your digital devices is communication. So like that's the primary reason. Creativity. You know, people do things. You can type. You can write. You can journal. You can. You could take pictures and videos and video editing.
Visual art. Yeah.
And then there's consumption, like that, where you're just sitting and consuming, and that consumption is what shapes you in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So
the question on consumption is like, what's consuming what?
Yeah.
It's like, are you consuming the media or is the media consuming you?
Yeah. Well, you are the commodity when it comes to social media. I mean, like if we watch The Social Dilemma, none of us pay for Facebook.
There's a reason why.
We are not Facebook's customers.
Yep.
Other people are buying our attention.
Stuff. Yeah, our attention. Yeah.
And so for me, it's kind of like guardrails, just regular check. I think setting those good patterns of church attendance, right? Like coming to church, being in a Bible study, being around others that will help keep you accountable, and balancing your intake. Make sure you are putting some garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yep.
So put some good things into your heart and lives. Many trusted resources over on our resource wall.
For sure.
I'd recommend. But if anybody's ever looking for those kind of recommendations.
There's one that's about to get up that I just bought 4 copies of that I'm putting up called Come and See. And it's about like different methods of reading your Bible. And so
fantastic.
It'd be a great book, great resource for people. The only thing I would say specifically about the diet and the intake thing is you got to be discerning on both sides. So discerning on the front side, should I watch this? Should I intake this? Should I consume this? Is this from a reputable source? And then on the other side, if you determine, maybe it's not Christian, maybe it's not whatever, but then on the other side, discern what you just took in. What was it trying to teach you? How was it trying to form you? What was it trying to tell you? Was it telling the truth? Was it telling a half truth? Was it telling the full truth? Was it telling no truth? Right? What was the good thing about it? What was the ugly thing about it? I'd encourage you if you have kids, if you have teenagers, great exercise in this, Inside Out 2. Go see it, and then with your family, sit down and talk about what is it trying to teach us? What is it trying to say? How does that align with what God says about anxiety, about emotions, about so that's just a little plug. But what we're not saying is don't take in anything secular. There's no such thing. There's no secular sacred divide. But when you do take in something that's not meant to specifically to edify you as a believer, if it's not Bible reading, if it's not a theological work, if it's not a sermon, think about, spend time, active time thinking, how is this shaping me? What does this want me to think about? What does this want me to think about politics or my neighbor or, whatever it may be. So that would be one thing. And what does this change in reflection of who Jesus is, the promised land, eternity? Does this actually matter that much? We're going to read 1,000 reports about the presidential election. In the length of eternity, 4 years is very short. So maybe spend less time worried about that and something that's going to have some more eternal purpose. That's to me. That's not to anyone else. That was a personal moment of reflection.
I would say one of the things that's very dangerous in our culture is amusement.
Oh yeah, amusing ourselves to death. That's a great book.
And because, and I thought at one point in time about writing a blog. I've thought many points in times about writing a blog. One blog I thought about writing was Amusing Faith. And instead of amusing being one word, as two words. Musing faith. In a sense that to muse means to think. So to amuse
Is not think.
is to not think. So when we go to, here we are
An amusement park.
to an amusement park, the point is to just shut your brain off and just go be entertained by all the things that are around you. And so amusement, and that's where amusing ourselves to death at the same time, like from Neil Postman,
Not thinking.
is about not thinking.
Yeah.
That amusement is a dangerous thing. When you go to watch Inside Out 2 and you disengage your brain, you take it in simply as amusement. You let it shape you rather than
You shape
think through
Yep.
a thoughtfulness, a space, musing faith.
Yeah.
And so we need to stay away from amusement in
Yeah.
a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's not a place for Kings Island.
Yeah.
I'll go there, especially with the meal plan.
That's right. Speaking of diet. All right. All cards on the table. This was my question.
All right.
And I just thought it was fascinating that in Hebrews 11,
Verse 23.
Verse 23, it says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. So I asked, what does it mean that Moses had faith when he was born? By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and that they were not afraid of the king's edict. What do you think that means?
Well,
I don't have an answer, but
yeah. And so I think that it's particularly the structure here of this particular
that makes
translation that is going to make us see this. And and to be honest with you, I didn't prepare as well in advance for this. But if we just maybe consider another translation in the order, this is the NIV.
Okay.
Does say by faith,
Nearly inspired version.
By
I'm just
faith,
kidding. I'm just kidding.
Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born.
Interesting. Okay.
And so it's by faith, comma, when he was born, like you set off there for the ESV, Moses was hid by his parents.
Okay.
So
So
for
really-
you Greek students, it'd be great to go back and to study the
See what the direct object
yes,
of the verb.
because it does here make the parents the subject
Yep.
with hid him in the NIV.
Yeah.
I grew up predominantly on the
KJV.
King James version,
What does
which
that say?
is echoes which is where the ESV is getting its structure. By faith, Moses, comma, when he was born, comma, was hid 3 months of his parents because they saw he was a proper child.
That means
Proper.
obedient.
Yeah.
I do understand. I do see, like, just looking at the rest of the text. Maybe I should have just read the chapter before sending in a question to the podcast that I was hosting. That's just like rhetorically, the author of Hebrews, whoever he may be, or she. Yeah, I don't know. The author of Hebrews is using a rhetorical device by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith.
Yes.
Not necessarily meaning Moses had faith as a baby. Okay, that makes sense. I probably should have just read the chapter before submitting the question or read the NIV version. Well, all right. Thanks for answering my question, no matter how dumb it was.
Oh, that's all right.
Oh, there's no dumb questions.
No, there.
Only dumb people who ask them.
You said it. Not
I
me.
said it. I stand by it.
I will say this has been a great and fun series.
Yeah, I've
through the
loved
life
it.
of Moses,
I've loved
and I have a lot of questions.
Yeah. Do you know about God burying Moses?
Oh yeah,
Moses dies outside the promised land, and it says that God buried him.
yeah.
I told Brent to preach a whole sermon on that, and he said no.
Well, and you've heard of the cleft of the rock, right? Like
Yeah.
Rock of Ages, cleft for me. We hear that language in other places that comes from. When God's like, I'm going to pass by. I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock.
Yep.
I'm going to pass by. You're not going to get to see my face, but you get to
my
see
rear.
me from behind. And
The hem of his train, or whatever it
yeah.
says. Yeah.
And so there's some things there. One thing that we don't know is, and I mentioned it yesterday, that it was likely Ramses II was Pharaoh at some point in time in this story. But none of the pharaohs really had an 80-year reign. So we tend to read Pharaoh here through the whole story
As one person.
as the same character.
Oh.
But the Pharaoh, when Moses was born, it may not have been the Pharaoh when Moses was 40
yeah.
when he left for
I
the
never even thought
wilderness.
but Pharaoh's just a title, not a
Exactly.
name. Yeah. I've never even thought about that.
And then he may not have been the same Pharaoh
That chased him out.
that when he comes back as an 80-year-old man after seeing the bush
Yep.
and comes back.
They're like, who's this guy? We've never seen him before in our life.
Or-
Who's this beautiful man?
Or could that Pharaoh have been someone he grew up with?
Oh, yeah. That's like the Prince of Egypt.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, in either case, both when he murdered the Egyptian,
I've never thought about this.
was that the Pharaoh of his birth? Was it the Pharaoh of a brother
Yep.
or cousin?
Yeah.
And when he comes back, the 80-year-old, did they remember him being born? Did they remember him being?
Probably not.
Yes. So
That's wild. I never even considered that.
Yeah. We
Wow.
get stuck in storybook mode.
For sure. No, absolutely we do. Yeah.
And
Whoa.
to think of 80 years passing. And although we know we think Moses perhaps might have had a stutter or some sort of speech impediment.
Yeah.
Because
we didn't really talk about that either.
and which is
'Cause
why
he's
I
like, I don't wanna-
I can't talk in front of people.
Yeah. Let Aaron come with me.
Let Aaron come and be the mouthpiece.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that Moses was uneducated. Very possibly could have been far more educated. Maybe not in the things of God.
Right.
Not having spent those 40 years growing up with the people of Israel.
His hieroglyphics were probably pretty good, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just, I mean,
Lots,
a lot of great.
lots to cover in the life. You know, it's like 4 books. You know, it's like Moses's.
Yeah.
And so it's like, here's my last question. Do you think Joshua wrote the part of Deuteronomy about Moses dying, or do you think Moses pre-wrote it and then died?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Oh, okay. Well, it's like who wrote this down? If Moses wrote this book, who wrote the part about him dying? He's dead.
Yeah. And I know some particular people. So jump to Joshua real quick. That
He's right there.
that are big fans of Joshua 1:9 in particular. Have I not commanded you to be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go.
Is that Moses saying that?
And it's in Joshua.
Yeah.
After the death of Moses,
Okay,
Moses, my servant, is dead.
I didn't know if that was like the final.
I feel
message.
it's really kind of like, just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And so that whole phrase, this whole commandment that he's given comes right out of that Deuteronomy 31, where Moses is passing the mantle. And twice he says, both to the people and then directly to Joshua, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not fear. And so it's like, I was just thinking, when I was reading that in prep, and I was like, oh, that's Joshua 1:9 right there.
Yeah.
But it's really like Joshua.
That's the baton of teaching being passed to Joshua.
He's just rewriting what Moses has already said
taught.
directly to him.
Yeah, man. So lots to cover in the life of Moses. We couldn't cover it all. Nathan, any final words?
No.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for the recap this week. We hope this conversation has encouraged you to keep striving to make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. If you aren't part of our church family, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning. We gather for worship at 10:30 a.m. For more information, you can always go to myfellowship.church. Thanks for listening. Be blessed.